remote assessment and what can make it more smooth. So with those tips and tricks, we're going to share some lessons learned along the way with regard to planning testing in a remote environment, some tips and tricks for communicating with our parents who have now become our test proctors in some cases. We're going to talk a little bit about managing the student testing environment. At the end of testing, of course, how we utilize the data, and then talk a little bit about leveraging the different resources that we might have available to us and how all of these things kind of come together to paint a picture of what remote assessment might look like for you at your schools. Go ahead, Kevin, thank you. So last spring, when all of our schools had to close due to COVID, we were contacted by many of our customers asking about the feasibility of using our testing products, Achievement Series and Performance Series at home. So the simple answer to that is going to be yes, of course you can do those tests from home because those tests can be accessed from any URL. But unfortunately, that yes was not so simple because there's so many different pieces of the puzzle that go into play. The remote testing environment is so diverse from one household to another. How do we make sure that all of these different kinds of connections with different computers and all those uncontrollable outside factors are being able to be answered and managed by our schools and by our teachers who are giving this assessment remotely? When we consider remote testing, we really do need to consider a larger collaborative environment. And that effort is, we need that collaborative effort to involve all of the parties who create this testing plan that we're going to be using. And those parties are our students, they're the staff at our schools, and also the parents. And those are our three main connections of how we need to make sure that we deliver information for this holistic testing plan to all of those parties that are involved. We certainly learned a lot from our testing last spring when we had to scramble when our schools closed, and we had to scramble and decide if we were going to continue with school and instruction and how we were going to assess our students. And as time went by and over the summer, we were able to formulate some plans about what we would do in the fall of this year with regard to testing. So as you think about your own remote testing environments, does your school utilize some type of LMS system where you and the student logs on and they see everything that they need for the day with regard to instruction and teacher lessons and for the remote testing? Do they have access to all of the links that they need? If they don't, then we as the school are going to have to communicate that information out to our parents and our students about the testing environment, where they need to go, what they need to do to log on, what information they need to be successful with that test. So when we consider the student part of the plan, the simple question of how to test might and what test we're going to deliver, what platform are we going to deliver that test in? Not only like taking a Scantron test, for example, but are we going to use any screen sharing software as part of that test plan delivery? Are we having our students log on to Zoom first and then do their test within that environment? Are we having the students do their test through Google Classroom, for example? Some of those screen share applications don't work with all testing sites with regard to pop-up blockers or any functionality that might mask some part of that testing application. So when we're thinking about your remote testing plan, we need to think about all of those scenarios about not only the tests that we want to deliver, but the environment that the student is going to take that test in. And then we also really have to consider our parents, right? Our parents are often juggling many tasks during the day. They work themselves. They are helping their students with their schoolwork. They are assisting their students with logging on to different platforms for instruction and testing. this fall, when we worked with all of our customers, we found that, you know, sending that test information home to our parents in an email was a good way to communicate, but sometimes our parents need something extra. So an example on your screen is taking the performance series test at home. This is a job aid that was created so that our customers could specifically send information home about that remote testing environment, specifically the URL, an example of what the screens look like, to really help our parents as test proctors get their students logged on, and so they have a successful testing session. Next slide, please. Let me check the chat real quick and make sure we're good. All right. We're definitely testing the technology today, right? We're all remote and learning some new things. So when we thought about remote testing, when we thought about test planning in that remote environment, we really try and think of three different groups of people that need information. Our students need information like their test ID, what URL they need to go to, what specific directions the staff member would like them to follow, whether they can use calculators or not on a math test. So that information that we're sending to our students is much different than the information that we might be sending to the parents. You know, what timing for that test? What do the testing windows look like? Directions for the parent as a test proctor. What environment do we expect the students to test in? You know, working alone, try to make the house quiet that day while they're taking their assessment. And parents are going to need help with any type of troubleshooting information, right? What if a message pops up on the screen and the student doesn't know what to do? What if the internet connection abruptly ends and the test turns off? You know, what can the parents do to help sustain that testing session? And finally, your staff members at your schools become part of this remote assessment plan as well, because they're the ones creating the assessments and deciding which ones we're going to roll out to our different students. Distribution of that information, and then the content of those tests. But the three things that are the same for each of those groups comes down to directions. And with those directions, each of our groups have a different set as well. If any of you out there on the session have any questions, or if you would like to share any positive test planning that worked really well in your schools and your environments this fall or this winter, or even last spring when we were all scrambling, I'm sure that everybody on the session would love to hear your input. So please, in your Cadence program, you can go ahead and type in the chat window any information that you'd like to share with regard to your own test plans and any positive things that happened in your schools. You know, not only is the environment different from test to test, you know, not all tests are high stakes. Some of them are just a quick chapter quiz. So we need to make sure in our directions and our communication out to the three groups, you know, which type of test is it that they're taking? Which of these assessments is going to be used for placement? Which of these assessments is for high stakes? For those of you that are familiar with the Scantron products, you know, our performance series test is an adaptive test. So we use that to kind of figure out what that student's instructional level is at that moment in time. And then we can look at the different standards and suggested learning objectives, and maybe even the student's NPR. If we're thinking about a formative assessment, or giving, you know, we just taught a whole chapter on fractions and we want to give a student just a test about fractions to check their learning. Or some of our diocesan schools give a religion assessment in this content neutral platform. You know, we want to be sure that the tests that we're delivering are meaningful. We want to make sure that we're using the data in a meaningful way. So the plan should take into consideration all participants in the plan. And we want to make sure that because of that remote environment, we are giving very specific rules and directions on how that remote test is being carried out in our different schools. Okay, Kevin, next slide. Okay, so you know, our test proctors are now our parents in a lot of our different environments. And in this remote world, you know, they are really challenged with a new set of skills that they have to manage in their environment with their student. So before testing even starts, when we consider this remote plan and the parents that we're communicating with, we have to be very clear about how we are distributing that information to our parents. And communication between the school and the home becomes really our top priority. We want our parents to be successful test proctors in this remote environment, and they need to have open lines of communication back to the school. So part of that test plan should include your preference on how you wish for those parents to communicate back to you. Should they have a question? Do we want them calling the school secretary, and that poor school secretary is going to just be bombarded with, you know, phone calls all day long? Is email the preferred form of communication? Do you need to set up some type of Zoom session like this with the parents in a very generic way, explaining about what's going to happen with the testing session or giving them tips and tricks on how to be successful? And then while the test is happening during the student test, we also need to keep those lines of communication open. We need to provide parents with information on what to do for troubleshooting if something should go wrong. And then something we've probably been doing all along, and that is at the conclusion of testing, sharing that score information with our parents. Okay, so after testing, it's really important for the school staff to discuss and understand the information that they gathered from testing too. Not just from a score perspective, but maybe some type of what went great, what went wrong, what can we improve for the future, how can we make this remote testing environment more simple, how can we better effectively communicate with our parents. So a lot of the pre-work that we do is going to determine how we roll that plan out. But it's also important at the end of that testing session to go ahead and have some kind of debrief so that we can revisit all of that information. Okay, next slide, please. What some of our customers have done is we've developed a parent guide to performance series. For those of you that are Scantron customers, there is a generic one in our documentation library. And a lot of our diocesan customers have gone ahead and created a custom document that gives information about the tests that they are delivering, the scores, and how it's all going to work. So as part of the thought process when you communicate with your parents, it's important to figure out what types of information that you want to distribute to those parents. And we can either, here at Scantron, we can either partner with you and create something custom that could reach all of your parents generically about testing itself, or we could create some type of parent guide that is specific to a specific test, if that is something that would work for your environment. So the school staff and teacher cohorts are great resources when thinking about the communication plan for all of the parties involved, for the students, for the parents, for different staff members, maybe amongst a grade level or the school as a whole. But certainly if you would like any type of custom communication, for those of you that are Scantron customers, you can contact your client program manager and they can assist you with that particular skill. All right, I'm going to pause here and check the chat and make sure that we don't have any questions. For those of you out in Cadence, if you again have any positive stories to share, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, So let's go to the next slide, please. And, you know, managing the student testing environment really touches on a lot of different things when we think about the student taking all of this assessment information and doing it from that home environment. There are many, many different things to consider, but what runs to the top of my head is, the internet bandwidth at the home. How many other siblings or family members might be on the internet at the same time of the test, and is that affecting the connectivity? What browser are they using in the home? And as part of the test plan, are we recommending a specific browser that works best with the testing application that you might be using? As remote assessment offers, many different challenges, being able to control that environment directly is something that we don't always have access to. There are so many different factors to consider. As our different customers rolled out their remote testing, or frankly, even students logging into Google Classroom and just doing their regular coursework, um, pop-up blockers and screen resolution errors became the predominant theme across many of the calls that come into our support organization. And part of that is providing some type of document for the home environment so that they can do some troubleshooting and make sure that the machine that they're using is set up for the correct settings. Does your school provide the machine for the student to test on? Are you distributing Chromebooks to all of your students? And are those Chromebooks being managed in a managed environment? Can your IT staff push out specific settings that would be applied to all of the different student machines? There are just so many different things to consider when we think about that remote testing environment. So we've got the technology side with environment and pop-up blockers and settings. And then we've got the home environment as far as where is that child taking the test? Are they able to be in a bedroom and close the door, or are they at the kitchen table and is it noisy? Is that student working alone, or are they having coaching from a sibling or maybe a parent? All of those types of factors are things that we out in the schools can't control. And the best way to distribute information is, again, that main theme of communication. We need to do a great job of really documenting all of these different line items and formulating that into some type of plan or some type of environment or document that we then distribute to all of our test takers. Next screen, please. So one of the major themes that we found needing extra help after that rush spring window last year, and again for fall this year, is the troubleshooting for technology related things. So I've put a sample up here of like a simple technology coordinator checklist, something that we here at Scantron created with one of our customers to kind of help the parents have a physical document that they could go and pull up and look at that would explain some of the error messages and give them tips and tricks on how to work with the browser itself with content filters or maybe whitelisting sites, giving them full access to the URLs that are affected with the Scantron testing products. So we found that creating a checklist is very beneficial to both the school and the home environment in supporting that remote testing effort. So all of these documents that I'm putting up on the screen as a sample are all things that you can find. If you're a Scantron customer, you can find most of these documents in our documentation library directly from the Achievement Series or Performance Series site. If you are not a customer, this session is being recorded, and certainly you are welcome to look at the samples and kind of formulate your own documents from just kind of the best practices that we've learned along the way. Next slide, please. So now that we've kind of come up with our plan and we've thought about, you know, what types of tests we're going to roll out to this remote testing plan, we've thought about the environment, we've thought about the different supplemental documents that our students and parents are going to need to be successful in this environment to take the test. So now we have to utilize the data, right? Because it doesn't do us any good if we assess our students and don't use that data for the greater good. So best practice is whatever you were doing before remote testing, those practices should still continue. We still encourage you to have your departmental meetings or your grade level reviews, parent-teacher conferences. You know, the test that you give is just, you know, one additional piece of the puzzle that we know about that child. When we think about them taking a Scantron test, we need to look at their Scantron testing results, but we also need to look at what they're doing in the classroom. We need to look at maybe their state testing, maybe their progression in scores and everything that they learned in the previous grade level, because we need to take into account all of those factors to get that 360-degree view of that child and their learning continuum. All right, so we do have a question in the chat, and I'm going to pause and go ahead and address that. So the question is, for the Scantron diagnostic assessment, does it have a way to determine testing irregularities? So built into the adaptive test called Performance Series, testing irregularities is built into the testing platform and the algorithm that the test uses. So when the student is taking a test, if they are answering in a pattern in rapid succession, so if they're going A, B, A, B, A, B, and they're just going through the test and doing that, the testing engine will detect irregularities. It will stop the test for that student. It will delete all of their results and force them to start that test subject again. So that's how irregularities works for Performance Series, okay, for the adaptive test. So when we take the data that we garner from testing, from all of our different tests that we give our students in whatever platform, it helps us understand better the pacing and the learning of our students. And we need to take into account that while we're talking about testing remotely, our students are also learning remotely a lot of the times. And we have found that we need to adjust the pacing of our lessons and the topics that we discuss with our students, because that home environment, we find students are learning at a little bit of a slower pace. It's harder for them to absorb. You know, some students learn really great with hands-on, some learn really great by hearing somebody, you know, speak it to them. Others, you know, read and learn better. So we need to take into account all of those things when we think about the data that we're looking at from that testing session. So Performance Series is a great growth measure because it's adaptive and all the students score on the same scale. And then we want to inform the parents, and we need to get creative in the ways that we do that, because, because we need to get creative. Think about ways that we're going to inform our parents about the scores, right? We need to sometimes distribute that information by email. Do any of your schools out there utilize a parent portal system where you can post information and students and parents can log on and either look at or download information? How do we distribute scores to our students? All of those things. Do we create different pictures and graphics and make it fun, and maybe have, you know, for elementary students, for our lower grade students, maybe we have, you know, a bunch of ducks and we kind of move them up a chart as different things happen with scores for our students so that they could follow along. Next slide, please. There are many, many different ways to utilize the data. One of the fun ways that Performance Series shows the data for our users is we have different parent profile reports that are available in the system. And these reports are able to be pulled out of the system very quickly in PDF format and printed. Currently, there are two ways to pull this report out of the system. Staff users can either pull reports for the entire class in a couple clicks, or they could pull individual reports student by student with a couple of clicks. Well, this past spring, one of our customers really wanted to be creative with this report, and they were using external product called PDF Builder. And that particular product was able to take these student profile reports and individually email the home or the email address of record within their student information system and attach the student's individual profile to that email and send it home to the parents. So with this creative way of using this external piece called PDF Builder, this particular customer was easily able to generate these reports showing the students testing history for last spring, and then email all of that information home with a couple clicks of the button. So I encourage all of you to be very creative with the way that you share scores to your different households. And some of the information might be higher stakes, some of the information might be a quick quiz, but either way, parents are always interested to know how their students are progressing. They're always interested to know what those scores look like, and especially now that they're the test proctors, I think they have a more vested interest in what the outcome of that student testing experience might have been. Next slide, please. The other interesting factor that we found through this remote testing environment, COVID-related change in the way that all of our schools are operating, is the ability for our staff and our student to use whatever resources they have and leverage those resources in that remote environment. So one of the things that came to mind as I was putting together this presentation is that for those of you out there, and a lot of you are Performance Series customers, if you subscribe to our reading test, within the reading test, we do partner with Metametrics and Lexiles, and on the student's profile, you can link out to the Lexile site directly, and the reading test assigns a Lexile score for those students. So now we can utilize that third-party resource on the Lexile.com site and find reading books that are appropriate for your students' reading level. You can generate book list, maybe as we end this school year this spring and the student takes a spring assessment and gets a Lexile level, you can generate maybe a summer reading book list for them. For those of you that partner with like a ClassWorks or an Edgenuity, they partner directly to the Scantron database, and they use the Performance Series score information to flood those pathways and learning experiences out in the ClassWorks and Edgenuity platforms. And then students can log on to those third-party resources, do their little mini lessons, and we can constantly check for understanding and kind of offer that remedial or even challenging practice for those students who might need some extra resources. Some of you out there also partner with NetTrekker, and those links are also available inside of the Achievement Series and Performance Series testing platforms. And we all have the content and curriculum in our schools, and we all have our pacing guides. We have our testing plans, and we're trucking through the school year and we're delivering these great lessons. We're doing our little quick quizzes. We're constantly assessing our students to try and figure out what they know and they don't know. And then taking that 360 and looking at the different resources that your school might partner with, and really leveraging those resources and really thinking outside of the box and ways to engage our students. whether it's an online treasure hunt type seek activity where they need to look up and find specific information, maybe using some of those resources, or maybe it's some type of online activity where they might all be in a Zoom session and collaboratively working on some type of document or project. You know, using those resources and having those links available becomes, you know, one additional piece in that larger puzzle of everything that we're doing in our schools, because all of us are wearing many, many hats these days. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the federal government, through some of the COVID relief money, has set aside nearly $800 million in funding that is available through the federally funded COVID relief. And you all and your Catholic schools can access some of this money, and Scantron can help. So Scantron is one of the NCEA partners, and we have a booth in the virtual exhibit hall. And you all are encouraged to go ahead and visit that virtual exhibit hall booth, and you can learn and gather some more information from our Scantron people about this money and how it might be available for your school. Very exciting. Always getting grant money and extra money can help everybody along the way for sure. All right, next slide, please. And finally, as we come to the conclusion of our presentation today, I just want to take a moment and thank you all for attending. I hope that you learned something new. I hope that we presented some material that might spark some conversation among your different peer groups and cohorts when it comes to rolling out a testing plan in that remote environment. There are a ton of factors to consider. There is definitely a lot of different creative information and examples out there for your consideration. And if you'd like to, you can either hold your phone up to this QR code and take a very brief survey about our session today. And we do have a few questions. So let me open up this chat box and see what we got. So for those of you that are looking for the Lexile link, for those of you that are our Scantron customers, the Lexile link is actually in the student profile when you're looking at the reading test results. So I'm going to mention the path to get there. So if you have a pen handy, go ahead and write this down. You could be inside of the Scantron platform and you would click on Site Admin. And then on the left, you would click on Search Student and you would enter your student's name and click Save or Next. And then when the student's name displays on the screen, you're going to click on their name. You're going to click on the Performance Diagnostic Work tab along the top. And then on the left, you'll click on Reading. This will open their student profile. And then you will see the Lexile links. All right, good question. And can I list the third-party resources mentioned during the presentation in the overview? So Kevin, if you want to go back to the slide that is numbered, we're going to go back to the third-party resources that shows the Lexiles and the Edgenuity, and keep going forward. Yep, keep going forward. And let's see, yep, forward again. Forward again, forward again. There we go, let's stay here. Okay, so for those of you on the line who had a question about the third-party resources, here's a list of some of our partners. And then for those of you that are asking on how you can purchase the Scantron programs, you can go to scantron.com and look for the sales area. You can email myself, victoria.grammis@scantron.com, It's victoria.grammas, Grammas, at scantron.com. I think we might also have a sales at scantron.com, and I can make sure to get your information to the correct person. You can also go to the Scantron booth in the virtual hall, and our salesperson, Tim Butterfield, will be more than happy to answer your questions directly. All right, any other questions from the group? All right, well, we're just at about our time. It's 1:15. I'm going to go ahead and stay on the line for a few minutes until the host cuts us off. If any of you have any additional questions, you can always follow up with us at any time at either sales at scantron.com, victoria.grammas at scantron.com, and we'll be happy to answer your questions or point you in the right direction. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy the conference, and it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Bye, everyone.